This is another sign of the times, an analysis and a commentary. Presidential panel faults Congress for inaction on drilling. Members of the presidential panel that investigated the 2010 BP oil rig explosion and spill have sharply criticized Congress for refusing to act on any of its recommendations and gave the Obama administration and the oil industry mixed marks. Their report said that federal regulators and major oil companies had generally improved the safety and oversight of drilling operations since the spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the worst in the nation's history. But the group said that Congress, hostile to new regulation and mired in partisan gridlock, had utterly failed. Across the board, we are disappointed with Congress's lack of action, said Bob Graham, a co-chairman of the panel and a former Democratic governor and senator from Florida. 2 years have passed since the explosion on the Deepwater Horizon killed 11 workers, and Congress has yet to enact one piece of legislation to make drilling safer. The group said that the Interior Department had imposed new standards for rig safety, well design, blowout preventers, and spill response, but that the new systems had not been adequately tested and the regulatory changes had not been written into law. And while the Commission recommended highly detailed and specific environmental impact studies, the report said those remain inadequate. The group warned that even as the Obama administration moves toward approving the start of exploratory drilling this summer, critical research remains incomplete and spill response plans have yet to be tested. The panel's members did not recommend a moratorium on Arctic drilling, but said that an icy and remote environment presented unique challenges. The commissioners also noted that the Interior Department had dismantled the office formerly in charge of offshore drilling, the Minerals Management Service, and replaced it with 3 offices responsible for leasing, safety, and revenue collection to avoid conflicts of interest. But Congress has not set the changes into law, and they could be quickly undone by a future administration. The Senate has passed a bill dedicating 80% of any future Clean Water Act penalties levied against BP to restoration of the Gulf. The House has not acted on the measure. The Presidential Commission formally disbanded in March 2011, shortly after it issued its final report on the causes of the BP disaster and its recommendations for improving offshore drilling safety. But the 7 members reconstituted themselves as an unofficial watchdog group known as Oil Spill Commission Action, intending to monitor offshore operations and issue periodic progress reports. William K. Riley, the other co-chairman of the panel and the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under the first President Bush, said that BP, which had long been a safety laggard in the oil industry, had begun to reform its culture. He applauded the industry for following the Commission's urging to form a safety institute headed by a respected Shell drilling engineer, Charlie Williams, but said that it should be separated from its current home at the American Petroleum Institute, the industry's lobbying arm. The industry grade would have been higher, Mr. Riley said at a briefing for reporters, but over last year there were 3 significant spills, accidents in China, off Brazil, and in the North Sea. That does suggest that although we see a serious effort on the part of companies to respond to our criticism that there was a systemic problem in industry, nevertheless, these 3 accidents occurred at 3 major companies. Jacqueline Savitz of the environmental group Oceana delivered a far harsher verdict on the response to the Gulf disaster. She gave industry and government failing grades in virtually every measure of progress since the April 20th, 2010 accident. It appears that the government has done little more than require actions that were already being done voluntarily, even on the ill-fated rig. She said in a statement, "It's as if they're letting the industry regulate itself." In other words, business as usual. It's also called kicking the can down the road. This, too, is another sign of the end of times as we know them, transition days, which is a time of extraordinary happenings, changes, and events, because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. And yes, that should be a very important question to ask. Isaiah chapter 17, verse 12. Woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations, that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. 13. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. 14. And behold, at evening tide, trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. Revelation chapter 16, verse 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. 4. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became as blood. Again, everything is connected, and everything is numbered. It's also called fate or destiny. And all these are more signs.